morning. This is day 9, approaching midday. We're having a cracking sail. With the waves, we're getting up to almost 9 knots at times. And we've got 20 knots of breeze-ish. And an apparent wind around the 15 mark. So that sets us at one reef in the jib and one reef in the main. You can see from all the white caps around that there's a bit more breeze today. Good solid force 5. And also we're seeing more flying fish, but still not in the hordes, it's still in single numbers. So we'll see if we can get some of those during the course of this video. So I've been asked to share my thoughts on monohull versus catamaran. I should declare my personal preference from the outset. I've spent most of my sailing on monohulls, and much of that was racing. And the big difference between racing and cruising is that with racing, you go when the gun fires, regardless of the conditions, unless the conditions are such that you elect not to go at all. Whereas with cruising, you choose your weather. Sail during the right seasons. And make sure you're not going to put yourself into harm's way. So first of all, let's talk about the pros of the monohull. I think that monohulls are generally faster. There are some very fast catamarans these days that you can get, but they're also very expensive. But size for size, 45-foot boat is going to cost a lot less than a 45-foot monohull is going to cost a lot less than a 45-foot catamaran. I think the advantage of speed means that you are putting yourself at risk on the ocean for a shorter period. With a catamaran, you have a lot of space, and that's very considerable. And that space is a big advantage when it comes to storing fresh produce, emergency water supply, personal kit.
The space makes it much easier to isolate a crew member who is ill with something that could be communicable. As happened to me during one delivery where a person came onto the boat and 2 days later was complaining of feeling unwell, and it turned out he had COVID.
But I think that one of the most significant advantages of a catamaran is the extent to which it does not heal. The sea has to be very lumpy for you not to be able to have a cup of drink on a table and it falling over. On the downside, perhaps upside even, the galley isn't gimbaled, and that means with a little bit of heel you really have to watch your pods. So you need a rail all the way around the cooker area to stop the pods from sliding off. But equally, it's very nice to have a stable platform to do the cooking on. My guess is that for most people, the preference between living with the heel of a monohull versus the flatness of a catamaran, they'd choose the flatness of a catamaran. I don't think that one is particularly safer than the other. I think it's just as easy to do something really stupid on a catamaran as it is on a monohull. With either, if you sail very prudently and within yourself, you shouldn't get caught out. That's why when we get into squall territory, we'll put an extra reef in the main, so that at night, when the squall comes through and the wind picks up an extra 10 knots, we don't need to be scrambling around on deck shortening sail, and we can do it all very comfortably. Well, during all of this conversation or monologue, I've had my camera trained at the sea, hoping that you're going to see some flying fish. One popped up briefly, but so far that's been the only appearance. The water temperature is now 24.25 degrees, so we're getting close to seeing lots of them, but maybe it's still a day or two away. Having said that, I have a very distinct aversion to sailing beam on to the seas in a catamaran when there are lumpy conditions. And if I have to do something close to that, then I would generally put myself about 20 degrees into the wave or 20 degrees off the wave. In other words, the true wind angle of either 70 or 110. But in those conditions, it's difficult to live, regardless of whether you're in a catamaran or a monohull. There's just so much motion. I'm sure I've missed a number of points on this topic. I think the main thing is really you've got to be happy with your choice. I sold my last boat in 2009 and then started doing deliveries. I think probably about 10% of my 61 transatlantics have been in monohulls. And the reason for that is quite simple. Monohull transatlantics were generally associated with a race, usually participating in the racing division of the ARC, the Atlantic Rally Cruises, which is an opportunity for commercially run boats to take paying customers. Whereas my deliveries with catamarans have primarily occurred because a catamaran costs a huge amount more, almost double what it costs to put a monohull on a ship to go across the Atlantic. And so a lot of people choose to have their boats delivered on their own bottoms rather than going on a ship. But overall, my personal preference would be a monohull. And I take that preference really because of the speed and because living at an angle doesn't particularly bother me. If you're sailing as a couple, then I can quite easily see that whilst it may not bother you, whilst a monohull angle might not bother you, it could easily bother your wife or other half. And still no flying fish. Well, that's not quite true. Halfway through my filming, I had a phone call. And it just happened that whilst I was on the phone and couldn't film, there was a flying fish. Wouldn't that just be the way? But today we've done our little bit of housekeeping. Yesterday I eased the halyard, mainsail halyard, to have it in a slightly different position going over the sheet at the mast crane, and today I tightened it up again. And I've eased similarly the mainsail sheet, the traveller, just an inch, so we have it at a different point on the going around the blocks, and it's not getting overly flattened. And later on I'll have a little walk around the deck and inspect everything. Make sure that there's nothing that looks as though it's about to give way, or that there are any nuts that are working their way loose. So if you have any questions for me, just fire them off, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Well, there was a moment of excitement. We just had our first school of flying fish, and would you believe it, I put the camera down. So here we go, I'm ready again, and we'll wait for it to happen. I'll be editing out the waiting bits, of course. On one trip we had a brown booby sat on the front seat over there. We had wood on that. We had the wood on that occasion. He was sat on there, pooing all over it, of course. But he would see flying fish take off from the boat, fleeing the boat, and when it landed, he would take off and catch the flying fish and then return back to his perch. A very neat strategy. We are now at 22 degrees north, so firmly in the tropics, and with the breeze we have a lovely temperature in the shade. The sun's pretty fierce, but in the shade it's very, very comfortable. Another couple there. We'll see if we can get some better shots. But soon I'm going to be called to lunch, and that'll end the filming for the time being. Blue cheese and walnut salad today for lunch. Our penultimate lettuce. So that's not too bad. 9 days after purchase. Icebergs last quite a good amount of time, if you get them fresh. And they need to be stored properly, the icebergs. Put them on their stems, their bases, and don't crowd them in. Otherwise you find the side leaves all rot. Aha! Here we have some sargasso weed, that little brown weed. As we go further west, we'll find we get huge rafts of it. In the early 19th century, writers used to sell novels which described how ships would get caught in these masses of sargasso weed, much the same as this fabled garbage patch in the Pacific, which I think is nonsense. And people in these novels, their ships would get trapped and somehow they'd be left alone on the ship. Perhaps the ship was abandoned and they were in the toilet or something. Anyway, they'd find a pair of tennis rackets and go walking out to other ships and discover chests of jewels and gold and eventually be saved and return back home and be immensely wealthy. What a nice story. But of course it's fiction. The sargasso weed doesn't grow that thick. But we'll deal with that when we come to it. It gets hung up on our propellers and rudders and we have to clear it periodically. There's one. Oh, yes, yes, and another one. Still going. Ooh, yes, he's landed and he's off again. Okay, well I think that's about it for today. Or for the time being anyway.